we're actually, as Jane said, going to go over a little bit of the nitty-gritty on how you put together a good science story. As you saw from our speakers at the forum, it can be really exciting to do, but like anything else, there are tricks of the trade. And I'm going to condense in the next hour or so probably an entire freshman college year, and I know that because I taught freshman college writing for over 10 years. So this will be sort of an intro to you. And what we're going to do, we're going to take a look at the focus and formats of the story that we talked about at the forum. Then I'll go over some of the tips and techniques. Katie will talk about using Google Docs because that will be the sort of vehicle for you to upload your drafts and for the editors to work on them and for you to see throughout the stages how they're doing. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you'll work with your editors. And then finally, we'll go over the next steps, the things that you should be doing in the next month or two before you hand in your draft. And by now, most of you probably should have gotten a little bit of a good start with some of your research after you left the forum, but we'll talk a little bit more about how to go about that. But before we do, I don't know who with us tonight are members of the creative team or social media team, and you may be wondering why we wanted everybody to be a part, not just the writers. So I'm going to do something, and I know I can't ask this out loud for you to respond to, but my question is, when you look at this, what's the first thing that you see? And of course, we all first see the photos. We see the graphics. And these aren't even really good graphics. They're kind of boring. They grabbed headshots of Obama and Governor Christie and Rick Perry. And of course, the lower right, the kitty cat's a little more interesting, but that is the first thing we see. And then the second thing we look at are the headlines. And the reason we look at them is because they're in bold, they stand out, they're graphically presented in a way we notice them. So right away, you can see why the creative team in this day and age, where most stories are graphically presented, are so critical to how an end story is read. And the social media team, well, let me tell you, unless the stories get out there, unless they're distributed well and they reach lots and lots of audiences, then there's no sense writing them. So I just want to say right up front that the creatives and social media people are so integral to this part. And, the writing is critical to keep people engaged once they start reading the story, but the other two are really important as well. So we're all here to work together. And if you can see on the right, that is a little more visual image of, that's a great science story. And that's from the National Geographic blog, Not Exactly Rocket Science. Scientists finally decide which bit of this weird animal is the head. And you can see that graphic right away grabs you in and makes you want to read the story. So, you writers should work very closely with the social and creative teams to make sure your words reach the largest audiences and are graphically presented in a way that really, really make people stop and look. So now we're just going to review what we talked about at the forum. You know by now that you can write and focus your theme or your hook on the scientist. Does he or she have an intriguing approach? Personal motivation? Did they have a history of someone in their family? Do they have a colorful personality that makes them, really, really interesting to write about? Some kind of unusual background. We also said that you could write about the science. What's the actual research and how is it done? Are there any unusual approaches, or why is it important? What does it mean? Who might it help? And when will we find out? But mostly people do a combination of the both. So I don't know, all of you are at different stages right now in your research, and you may be coming, pretty much closer to what you want to focus on, and a little bit of both. And once you do that, you can decide the format that you'd like your story in. And again, this is just a recap of what we went over at the forum earlier in June. The 3 styles that you can hand in for your story are a news format, a blog format, or a question and answer format. And just to list the comparisons on them, the style is either straightforward for news, it's creative and informal for blogs, and it's straight question and answer for Q&A. The tone or the voice is very objective and serious in a news story. In a blog, it's friendly and conversational. It can be first person. You can say, I did this and I spoke with who and I thought this. And in a Q&A, you actually are bringing your voice into the writer's questions, into the questions you ask in the introduction, and the scientist's voice into the answers. You can see news style was the main way to write for many decades, and it was used in news reports, press releases, trade and main media. Now, more people are also including blog styles in magazines, social media, broadcast media. You see it all over the web. And Q&A formats are actually used more and more in print, broadcast, and online media as well. One is not better than the other. It's all your personal preference. It's what you bring with your creativity and your style to the table. And sometimes your subject dictates your format, and sometimes your format dictates how you will write your story. The headlines, no nonsense and factual. With the blog, it's creative. Keywords play an increasingly important part of how stories get out these days in the Google searches. When people are looking for anything about cancer, they'll type in cancer, and you want keywords that actually lead them to the Curious Young Writers website for those stories. And you'll learn much more about that in the social media training. Quotes in news stories actually support the facts. Quotes in blog stories are more colorful and they reflect the personality of the person speaking. In Q&As, it's not just a matter of asking a question and copying down the answer. You really need to craft the intro very well, and you have to have engaging questions. Even if they're not exactly what you asked, you can edit them in a way where they sound really good. And you need well-edited answers, because sometimes the people who you ask questions to go on and on and on and on. And very frequently, you can have 3 or 4 questions that you've asked, and you combine some of the answers of each of them into one of your print answers that you add in your story. I do that frequently in things that I write. For those of you who are just joining us, we're asking you that you mute your screen, and if you have any questions, just type them into the message box in the bottom of your control panel, and we'll see them and we'll answer them as we go. The story format, and again, this is just a reminder. Again, I showed this at the forum. We talked a little bit about the poop pills, and in the news lead, this would be written, patients with stubborn, debilitating bacterial infection may soon be treated with pills full of microbes derived from human feces. You could see the more bloggish style or creative leads. The healing power of poop are now available in pill form. New study has found that just 2 days of treatment can cure a dangerous infection that kills 14,000 Americans a year. And then, of course, the popular, a promising new study puts a decidedly positive spin on the epithet, eat. And the Q&A format, people who wrote this actually did a nice little intro about the 2 doctors that they were interviewing who are trying to commercialize these poop pills, and then they came up with some questions. The very first one being, what do you say when someone asks, what do you do? All 3 stories, even though they're very different in style, tone, and voice, all contain the same information about the disease, the value of human feces to treat the disease, who it can help, who it won't help, which is just as important, when it may be commercialized in a way that can reach a broad audience, and information about the research itself. So no matter what style this was, news, blog, or Q&A, it all depicted the same information. So that's why you have a choice on which take you want to go with your research, because on your team, you may have, you do have 3, 4, 5 writers all doing the same story or doing the same scientists' research, covering the same scientists' research, but you can all approach it very differently. Now, here comes the fast and furious writing tips and techniques. And again, these are things that in very subtle, or even very blatant ways make your writing much more engaging and make people more prone, once they get past the headline and the headline pulls them in, to keep reading your story. And the first, of course, is the magnetic headline. And whether it's creative or straight, headlines really need to capture the theme right up front. And as I mentioned, they have to contain the key words that a person would be searching for if they went online looking for information about that story. So in the case of the poop pills, I don't think they would, necessarily, they might put in Google poop pills, but more likely they would put in, this serious stomach infection. Although if you Google poop pills, you'll get all those articles. So you have to think of the keywords in your headline and in your first paragraph. Your first opening lines are really what set the tone and voice of your story. You probably know yourself when you flip through a magazine or, flip through a blog or go through Instagrams on your phone or, anything that has any writing in it, even tweets. If you're not pulled in right away, you're not going to bother reading the rest of it. So you want something that shouts wow and tells people that it's not boring right away. And then you have to also make sure that your theme or your hook is clear in the first two paragraphs. It has to be very apparent what your main take-home point is and a couple of backup points in your first two paragraphs. That's not only for the search engine optimization reasons that I spoke about, but also for excerpting, because a lot of times what happens with blogs or stories, if you're going to write a 300 to 700 word story for Curious Young Writer website, it may be that the social media team needs to excerpt just 140 characters in that for a tweet, or they need to do something on one of the other social media platforms that they just need your key points that they can get quickly and written well. And that's why it's so important for you to be able to get that in your first two paragraphs, and they can take that and grab that and use it for other things to generate more engagement in your story. One of the things that I see all the time when I deal with people's writing is that they make their writing passive voice as opposed to active. And a lot of people think that that means past tense, and it doesn't. Past tense can be active voice. It's just that you want to make sure you eliminate different words and make your writing be have an active voice. So, for example, it takes time to do research is a passive format of sentence structure. Research takes time, not only saves words, but is more active. So mentally, people are able to read through that faster, and subliminally, it seems like it's more positive and proactive. There's nothing better than science. Nothing is better than science. You can see it gets rid of the, innocuous adjectives and unnecessary words. This also is a principle that eliminates excess words, but we all have a tendency to try to add words in either to sound more intelligent or to show that we have a good vocabulary or for any other reason. But keep it simple, because again, subliminally, it makes your, they've done all kinds of studies, communication studies, and the way people take in information. And it's almost like slogging through mud when there's extra words, and people have to stop and actually pay attention, and their brains have to take in each individual word. I don't know what happened there. Okay. But you get you get the idea. And these are some of the things that editors will be working on your stories to make sure they don't have. But if you can do it up front, it will not only make the editors' work easier, you will have a story ready to go on the website and be published very soon. The other thing that's really important, and it's often a challenge because you're writing about science and technology and research, is it's really hard to do that without using a lot of technical terms or jargon or acronyms or professional lingo. But that is something that most people don't understand. And you have to really force yourself to write on about a 5th grade level. So if some of you have younger brothers and sisters, tell them what you're writing about and explain it in regular language, that's the easiest way to then sit down and begin writing your story. I do that all the time myself, and it works wonders. If you need to use scientific terms, explain or simplify them. Acute myocardial infarction is a heart attack. And most people understand heart attack, where most people don't understand acute myocardial infarction, except in ER shows because they want to sound like professional doctors. But you want to communicate to regular people. Another tip is to actually tighten your writing by removing as many prepositions as you can. And this is a really funny thing because I write things, sort of stream of consciousness when I've interviewed people or I've done research and I'm writing about I'm on assignment writing. And then once I'm done, I go back and I try to take out as many of the tos or ofs or fors or bys or as or ins or any, prepositions. You'd be surprised how they don't add anything to a sentence and you don't really need them. Another thing that you want to do is you want to go back, and often this is something that after you have written your first draft, it's easier to do that way than to try to think of these words up front. But you want to go back through your first draft before you show it to anybody else, and you want to pick some verbs that you've used in your story. And you want to go to a thesaurus. And for example, here, I looked up walked, and in the thesaurus for walked, there was stomped and strode and sped and tiptoed and all those things. And the other verb in that sentence is looked and, glared, carefully examined. So if you read the sentence, the science walked into the lab and looked at the cultures, it's a nondescript, pretty boring sentence, and it doesn't illustrate exactly what's happening. But if you say the scientists sped into the lab and puzzled over the cultures, it gives, another dimension to what that sentence means. Or tiptoed and snuck a quick look at. It kind of gives you an insight into the personality of the scientist. It lets you, sort of see the action a little bit more. And the same thing with noun. So in that same sentence, and you want to do this selectively. You don't want to do this throughout your whole story because then it will just become too grandiose. But in certain areas where it will really help your reader see what you're talking about, you can look for, any kind of adjectives that describe scientist. Let us see, is he agitated? Is he tall? Is he wearing sneakers? Is he gray-haired? So you could say, for example, the sneaker-clad scientist sped into his cluttered lab and puzzled over the purplish cultures. So that paints a much more visible picture for your readers than just saying the scientist walked into the lab and looked at the cultures. And, try it on a few sentences. I think it can be a fun thing, and you'd be really surprised how it makes your writing pop. Another tip is metaphors. And I know, I kind of make a joke here. Some writers' metaphors flow like water. Others have to paddle harder while they're trying to write good metaphors. And a few of us just sink down and drown. But actually, they truly, truly, truly are worth the effort because a good metaphor, they're just powerful tools for showing rather than telling. And when we say, when I showed you that first picture with all of the photos in on the blog, we say a picture is worth 1,000 words. Well, a metaphor is a written picture. You use words to create a picture with a metaphor, and it really is worth 1,000 words. So if you could take the time to come up with a few good metaphors, particularly in science, I'm sorry, I'm seeing a question now. Okay, Tyler is asking, with the news format, will the pictures be more scientific and less colorful and creative? Absolutely not. The news format now, more and more, for any of you that look at your, daily newspapers or read, the reason that the pictures were boring in the Huffington Post that I showed you with the headline, just the headshots of Obama and Christie and, Rick Perry, is because they update their news so frequently that they have to grab quickly whatever they can. So their creative teams are so busy that they just grab things and throw them at the people putting together the page. We have a little more time with that, and the graphic is going to be so important in all three formats, because even if it's a straight news format, you want to grab the people in with a picture. So it's just critical to do that. And then Shreya is asking what SEO means. It is search engine optimization. And basically, it is a computer term that stands for making your story the most searchable that it can be on the website. So if when most things, people go to Google and they put in search words, and search engines look at those words and then come up with a list. When you do a Google search, you'll have pages of findings, and the ones that have, there's a lot of things that go into who comes up top when you search for something. A lot of times it's commercial. If I'm searching for kayak and Jersey Paddler is paying a lot and getting a lot of keywords in there, then Jersey Paddler is going to come up first in my Google search for kayak. But if someone is searching for shark research and cancer, those two words, if they are used in the top of the headlines and the paragraphs of Curious Young Writers, chances are that the Curious Young Writer story will come up in that first page of the list that you get when you go to Google, and then someone can click on that. So it's really important to get that, get those keywords. That's what they're called, keywords in for this. It's called search to optimize the search engines and how they look at your story, so you get on Google better. You get higher up on Google when people search. I hope that's clear. Getting back to metaphors, really all a metaphor does, and I know you guys have had this in school year after year after year, but honestly, for science and medical writing, metaphors are saviors. They are buoys for anybody who's a writer. It conjures an immediate image because it compares an object, an emotion, or a concept with something we already know. In fact, when they had trains, when they first made trains, they didn't call them trains. They called them iron horses, because people had no idea what a train was. But if you said an iron horse, they already knew what a horse was. So they got the idea that it was a machine that could run faster than a horse. And they called them iron horses for a long time. So, if you go back through history, a lot of the words that we have were created metaphorically, so they could create pictures that people could understand. So now here we are, you guys are writing about research that's complex and has a lot of terms, or maybe it's cutting edge research that people have no idea what they're talking about. So it's really helpful to create an image so people do have an idea. So for example, trees are the lungs of the planet. That says a lot more. I was an environmental writer for many years, and it was very, very difficult to try to get across to people the whole oxygen, exchange, and carbon dioxide and everything else that happens when trees are cut down, or, when you grow trees. And when you say trees are the lungs of the planet, it makes a blanket statement where people can go, oh, and then you can add a few sentences to explain that afterwards, but at least they get that picture. Or someone scans, if you have CAT scans or MRIs for cancer, someone scans lit up like 4th of July fireworks. That gives you a great picture that, they showed a lot of things and we really need to look at it. There's a lot of common medical science metaphors that you can use as writers in your stories. Military metaphors are used a lot because it represents the body's response to disease in terms of attack and defense. Information is big now because as you write about pathways in the body and really the basic research that a lot of your scientists are doing, they happen to be doing this research on, the body's receptors or transmitters or pathways. So that's a communications metaphor to help us understand what they mean by that. Sports, as always, is a great metaphor, rounding the bases, striking out, tackling things. And again, autos, a machine in need of repair. There's lots of things you can come up with your own, but these are 4 really common metaphors that are used by science writers. I'm going to give you an example from some of the work that I do. If you try to explain to someone their treatment options for cancer, there is a new field of cancer, a very new field where medicine has only been approved, recently, called immuno-oncology. People have no idea what immuno-oncology is. So to try to explain it, one of the companies that I do work with has come up with this metaphor. If your body is like a garden, surgery, which we all know about, removes, takes your tumors out. Well, in this metaphor, it removes large patches of weeds in the soil around them and sometimes disturbs the good plants and leaves some weed roots behind, meaning that gives you the visual image that even if you do surgery for cancer, you still have some of the tumor left that could possibly grow back. Chemotherapy is like spraying a general weed killer on the whole garden, and the approach might not kill all the weeds and may also harm some good plants. And that's exactly what happens when people undergo chemotherapy. It spreads throughout their body. It doesn't always get the cancer, and it also harms good cells. Radiation is like increasing the power of the sun with a magnifying glass to target and dry out the weeds, but in the process, some of the good plants can also be damaged. It also dries out and kills some of the good cells in your body. With targeted therapy, which is the newer medicines that actually are supposed to leave the other cells alone, and they're fairly new in the last few years, weeds are directly sprayed with weed killer, but good plants still may be damaged because there's no guarantee that they can just target the exact cancer cells. So, to explain this brand new field of immunotherapy in cancer, it's like adding a weed control fertilizer to the soil, and the fertilizer enriches the soil to help control the weeds, which in turn restores the health of your garden. Meaning that these are drugs that you take that make your own immune system stronger to fight cancer. But too much fertilizer in the soil or too much of drugs in your body might still harm your garden. So you can see where this is, it's a long involved metaphor, but has helped a lot of people to understand this brand new field of immunotherapy that people, need to understand if they're going to make choices about how they're going to get treated for cancer. And this example is from Bristol Myers Squibb. Another thing that I want to highlight a little bit is numbers, because when you're doing science writing, there are often numbers in the way of, cell numbers or research numbers or financial numbers, how much it's costing, how many patients are involved, how many people die from a disease, how many people are affected by a disease. The problem with that is most people really can't comprehend when you say large numbers or decimal points. So it's really, really important to simplify your quantities, your statistics, your dollar amounts. Anything that shows up in your story as a large number should be a red flag for you to do something with. So I'm going to give you some ideas of what you can do with these numbers. The first thing is make sure that you write them with proper style. And you had the CYW style guide in your folder at the forum, but we'll also put it on the website so you'll have access to that. And one of the things in the style guide is about writing out whole numbers from 1 to 9. That's just journalistic style. Use numerals for any whole numbers 10 or greater, and use numerals for fractions, meaning if you have 3.2, you actually write the number 3, you write a dot, and you write a 2. You also want to round off. So if you have 2,302,970, it's much easier to read as 2.3 million. 982,423 has much more impact as nearly a million, written out with numbers, or 1 and the word million. You can just see yourself how much easier it is to take that in. 53.7 should be rounded up to 54. And If you want to make it even easier for people to understand numbers, you can use a little math. If a disease, for example, kills 400,000 Americans a year, you can help readers grasp that number and actually divide. So if it's 400,000 a year and you divide by 365, then you get it kills 1,096 a day. If you divide that by 24 hours, this disease kills 46 people per hour. And if you further divide 46 by 60 minutes, you get 0.76. So it's like 3/4 of a person, but it's, almost a person a minute dies from this disease. And you can actually say in words, nearly 1,100 per day, more than 45 an hour, or almost a person a minute in the US dies from this disease, which is much more impactful than just putting that number down. And I'll tell you, when they had the 14,000 with the poop example, I think it would have been better if they actually had done a little calculation and made it more impactful in that way. You can then take it a step further and use a metaphor, a simile, or an analogy to create an image about the number. So if the calculations above, give you the numbers per day, per hour, or per minute, you can do things that relate to those numbers. So 3 full jumbo jets crashing into a mountain every single day. And I got that because if it kills nearly 1,100 people per day, about 350 people fit on a plane on a regular jumbo jet. And so that's 3 full jumbo jets. Losing the entire graduating class of your high school every day. If you go to a school where 1,000 kids graduate, that's true. Killing off the population of Minneapolis each year, or a fatal New York City bus crash every hour. It's endless. You can think of anything you want, but I've done this with numbers and it has huge impact in stories. So I would highly suggest that you try to do this. And when you ask people in the United States, what is the most, deadly cancer? For years, people said breast cancer, and it's actually not. And to be honest with you, or what is the most deadly disease? People said breast cancer. Heart attacks kill more people. People die from heart disease more than they do cancer in the United States. But one of the reasons that breast cancer got so much publicity is because the American Cancer Society used this approach, and they started saying 1 in 9 women will die from breast cancer each year. So that meant that if you were a female and you sat in a classroom with 10 other people, they didn't say the age, they didn't say anything. You looked around and you knew that, one of your friends eventually would get breast cancer. So it was so effective that it has raised the consciousness. Now they've gone on to the pink and the pink ribbons and everything, but it's been really effective with awareness on diseases. The most important thing that education can do now is to kind of use these metaphors or these images to help people understand what they're doing in research and how they're trying to help people. So as writers, you can do that as well. Besides making your writing engaging, you really need to make your writing accurate. And you can see here that punctuation changes meaning. A woman without her man is nothing. A woman without her man is nothing. So it changes completely the meaning of that sentence when different punctuation is used. And I use this as a joke. Punctuation saves lives. Let's eat, Grandpa. Let's eat, Grandpa. So you can see, it's a little silly, but punctuation is the guidebook for people to follow what you're writing. It's kind of your traffic signals to them to take a breath, that you're ending a thought, that they should read, something in a way that you meant it to be read. So make sure that you're really careful with your punctuation and have someone else check it, as your editors will, but you can check it as well. The other thing I want to touch on are commonly misused words. You probably have done this by accident yourself. You probably know people who do. But we would like you to just be very careful. These are sort of the top of the list. And if you could take your time and make sure that you've used the meanings, I'm not going to take the time to go over them right now, but there are some very funny websites that play up how some of these words are misused, and we don't want our CYW stories to be mentioned in those websites or part of those jokes. So just take your time and make sure you use the right words, and if you're not sure, look them up. It's really easy now to just Google a word and get their exact meaning. Okay, moving right along here. These are just some things, and I don't have examples of them because we will go over them with the editors. But from my years of working with young writers, I can tell you some of the most common mistakes I see are mistakes in verb tenses, meaning that part of the story starts in the present tense. He says, he goes, he does, he's researching, and then at some point in the story it happens to switch. He went, he did, he researched. Pick one and stick with it. Sometimes current tense works really well in stories. You know, he says, he yells, he admits. Other times, past tense, we don't care either way, but just make sure it's consistent throughout the story, whichever one you pick. The other thing is subject-verb agreement. I see that all the time. So if you have a sentence that says, the three girls goes to school, and that's, of course, very blatant, but I see all the time where the verb is a singular verb and it's matched with a plural subject and vice versa. I see a lot of times when a verb doesn't modify the subject correctly. So you want to watch out for that when you're writing as well. And again, your editors will take a look, we'll all take a look at it, but you should be aware of it yourself. You want to check your citations. We're going to use the MLA style, which I understand most of you use in school anyway, and you're going to include them as a numbered list at the end of your story. And you want to make sure that your citations are in the MLA format and that you have, keep notes when you're writing. I know how hard it is to sometimes do research and you kind of forget who said what or where you got what from. So this is just a mindful reminder to make notes to yourself when you are writing things down or looking things up to make a list for your citations. And a huge tip that I think is probably, if you don't take anything else away tonight, read your writing aloud. You would be shocked at how many things you will find either don't sound right, aren't punctuated correctly, or don't have the right verb tenses or subject-verb agreement that you don't see when you just, read with your eyes. But when you read your draft aloud to yourself, even better, and I didn't put this down, but if you have a brave friend or sibling or parent and ask them to read it to you, you will hear exactly how other people read your draft. And then you will be able to, really get a sense of, does it work? Does it flow? Or is my punctuation giving them the right instruction? I see a question. Will citations need to pass some sort of credibility criteria? Yes, Wikipedia is a capital offense. We have in our handouts, and they will be put online as well, we would like you to use, Google Scholar and some other credible sources that are listed in that handout. If you want to go to Wikipedia as sort of that first, pass to find out about your scientists, find out a little more about the science, and you want to get, Google definitions, that's okay. But as far as your MLA sources, we want people to be able to read your articles and know that they were credible and, that they pass muster. You can write down where you got your information, and the, I guess the editors and the science stars, science stars will check your sources and make sure they're credible. Does that answer? I love that, capital offense. No, we won't. We won't do anything awful to you. We'll just make sure that you find the source somewhere else. And don't rely on your spell checker. You can see for yourself. I have a spelling checker. It came with my PC. It plainly marks for my review mistakes I cannot see. I strike a key and type a word and wait for it to say whether I am wrong. So, that's just a funny reminder, but have someone prove it for you if you're not sure. Make sure you check it yourself. You are your first line of defense, but I think before you even give it to your, team members or your team editor, if you can have someone in your family or a friend, as I said, read it out loud to you or, check it for you, that's a good first step. If not, don't worry, your team editor will take a good hard look at it. And I am going to turn this over to Katie right now, who's going to walk you through using Google Docs. She is the CYW student editor who is going to be, along with Julia, looking at everything that comes from your team editors. Once it has passed muster with your team editor, it will be sent on up to Katie and Julia. So Katie, you can let me know when to click and just go over whatever you want.
Sure. Hi. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. So
okay. Perfect. So using Google Docs. The CYW team really learned this year that Google Docs is the best way for the team to collaboratively work on the story so that the writers and the editors can see all the comments and the suggestions on one document, and you have the revision history in different modes so that the story can really be worked on by a group of people at once instead of different drafts being sent through people at different times. That got very confusing. This is really the easiest way to do it. So you can click. Okay, so again, why do we want to use Google Docs? Many people can work on the story at once. You can share, which I'll get into in a little bit, so that everyone in your team, your editors, your scientists, your comms mentor can all be on the same document that you're on. How do you make a Google document? Oh, it's okay. So how do you make a Google document? Everyone's going to need a Gmail account. I'm sure you all know what Google is. You go to Google, you hit sign in, and if you don't have an account, you can create an account. If you do, feel free to use your school or your personal email. You're only really going to have one or two documents added to your Google Drive. But once you create a Gmail account, you're going to open up your Google Drive. And the photo to the right with the red arrows over it is what you'll see once you open your Google Drive. And once you do that, you'll click the red New button on the left-hand side and scroll down to Google Docs. And a blank document will appear as if you were in Pages or any other form, and that document is now in your Google Drive. And the first thing that you should do is name the document. In the top left-hand corner, you can click Untitled Document, and this little screen, which is on the bottom picture, will ask you to rename the document. And there you'll include your last name, the story topic, and the draft date, so that it's very easy for you to see this is exactly what I'm writing, and so that everyone who you share the document with knows who's writing it, when it was written, and what it's about. You can click. Okay, so sharing. Once you create your Google document and you get your preliminary research done, and you start really creating your first draft, that's when you can share it with your team editor and your comms mentor. And you can also share it with the members of your team who are doing kind of the same topic so that you can get some comments from them. But really, at the minimum, share it with your team editor and your comms mentor. After that draft has been created and you've gone through all the necessary interviews that we talked about at the forum, you send that draft to your science mentor, who will look over the document and make sure that all the science is correct and send you back some suggestions to work on. And once that's done, you've gotten all your suggestions and your comments in, and this will be a process with a lot of drafts, not just one first draft and one final draft. You'll go through a lot of different editing processes. Like Mary was saying, read it aloud to yourself. You're your best editor, not just the team editor should be looking over your document. Ask the science mentor to look over it, the comms mentor, yourself. Get as many eyes on it as possible. And then once that final draft is done, that's when it gets sent to Julia and I, and we'll look over everything and give you back some suggestions and comments possibly, so that the document is fitting with all the formats that we want and there are no technical errors. So you can click.
Okay. I just have a question before you go on, Katie. If
Sure.
someone writes their draft on their computer in Word or Pages or whatever, and then they open this Google document that you just described, what do? They cut and can they save what's on their computer as a Google document, or they have to cut and paste it into the document that they opened in Google?
I think in some programs you can export the file that's in a different program, let's say Pages. You can export it to Google Docs, but the easiest thing to do would probably be copy and paste it, and then if there's any spacing errors, just kind of fit it back in. But for the most part, I know that all the Morristown High School students know Google Docs very well, so if anyone has any questions about that, you can ask any of me or Julia or any of the Morristown students, but for the most part, if you copy and paste it into Google Docs, you should be fine.
Okay. And we did have a question. One is, will this presentation be available for download later, or can you email it to me? We actually are going to post it on the Curious Young Writers website, so anybody will have access, and we are recording it as well, so you'll be able to hear this conversation that we've had and also go through the PowerPoint, so you will have that as a resource. And if that doesn't work for you, just contact me, Merry, and my name is on the master list of contacts that you got at the forum, and I'm happy to send you a copy of the PowerPoint, but it will be available on the website. And also, Tyler wanted to know if everyone should let their team editor know which format or topic they are using before they start writing. No, Tyler, it's totally up to you. You have, as a writer, and this really mimics the real world. Unless you are given an assignment from an editor that says, Tyler, we want you to do a Q&A, you have freedom to interview your scientist, and you have the freedom to pick out how you want to focus on that science or scientist, and you also have the freedom to create that story in whatever format you want. The only guidelines is that it has to be between 300 and 700 words, and it has to use the MLA style in the citations. And other than that, you have pretty much creative freedom there.
Right, and if you're wondering, you want to make sure your team editor is on the same page with the message of your story. If in your communications with your team editor you do want to make clear, this is what I'm trying to make a point of in my story, then you can do that. But yeah, you're free to do whatever format or topic you'd like. You have a lot of creative freedom. And so the suggestions and comments. There are two different modes that you can use within Google Docs. And the suggestion mode we'd like to be used by the team editor so that they can go through kind of with a fine pen and make sure that there are no technical errors, that everything that Mary was talking about before is fixed. Maybe they can read it aloud and make sure that everything is succinct and correct. And so what's special about suggestion mode is that you can actually see to the side of the document what it looks like. You can see with the words crossed out and exactly what the team editor wants you to fix, and then you can accept those suggestions and really actually see what the team editor would be writing as if it was, a printed out, written on copy of the story. And then comments mode, it's very funny, comms mentor, should be used by, so comment mode should be used by the comms mentor. And what's good about this is that the comms mentor, we know, isn't going through with that same pen to edit any of the technical errors. They're going through to make sure that the story fits the format that we're looking for. And so they can highlight different sections of the story and leave maybe more lengthy comments off to the side that the author can read. It's not like you're telling them to fix different words. You're making more general suggestions. And then the video is something you can look at that really shows the difference between suggestion and comment mode. And you can look at that once the presentation is on the website if you need more clarification. And again, if you have any questions, feel free to email me about this. I know Google Docs pretty well at this point, so ask any questions. And for those of you who don't have a Google account, what's really important to do is once you really get your research done, make sure that you make a Google account. And for those of you who do, create a blank Google Doc. Go through, see how comment mode works, see how suggestion mode works, figure out if you have any questions and look them up, so that once you really start writing your story, you're not running into technical problems. You're just focusing on getting the story.
Okay. And Katie, we have a question from Nasha. She wants to know if team editors are allowed to leave some comments in addition to mainly leaving suggestions. We will be having an editors webinar in August, and we will go over that whole process. But if you want to just address that real quickly.
Right. It's what I was saying was just more of a guideline, because we don't want the comms mentor to think that they have to go in and edit everything. But yes, if the editor wants to go in and leave a lengthy comment, feel free to go in and leave a comment. It's a very good thing to do. That way, if you don't necessarily want them to change maybe a word, if you have different suggestions, or you want to tell them, okay, you need to maybe simplify this number into a couple different options, or if you're not sure about how you want them to change it, you can leave a comment. So the editors feel free to change between suggestion and comments mode, of course.
Thank you. Okay. Anything else on the Google Docs, Katie?
No. If you have any questions, feel free to email me.
Great. That was terrific. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, just a little bit of note on working with editors. The first suggestion is to remember our goal. I know sometimes there are students who are, better off individually. They feel like they do better on their own, and, your grades count on how well you do, and sometimes it's frustrating if you get in a team and someone doesn't do as well as you, and, there's a whole host of things that can happen when you're working with teams. However, that's not true with CYW. We're working as a team to mimic what goes on in the real world of writing publications and creative teams and social media, as if we were really we are a bona fide publication, but it's giving you the experience of what it's like to work in the real world with editors, and our goal is to write engaging, interesting, and valuable stories for people about topics that are important in their lives and they otherwise would have no way of finding out about them. There is not enough good science writing out there. That's what got me involved. That's what got Jane to start this organization, and everybody else who is involved on all the adults you saw involved on the communications mentoring and science mentoring and, the advisory board. We all got involved because we think it's that important for people to learn how to communicate about science well, and to, paraphrase an old saying, it takes a village. It really does take a good team to meet that goal. So when you work with editors, no one is criticizing your writing. No one is telling you that you did anything wrong. It basically is we all are on the same team trying to make this as good as we possibly can. So rework it if necessary. And if an editor, we will have an editing workshop in August. And if you disagree with something that an editor told you, or you feel really strongly as a writer that what you've put in there is important to your piece, you have the opportunity to go back and forth. And that's what Google Docs and the comments is all about. And finally, celebrate the success. I mean, when the story is moving in these stages, when you're getting from your team editor and then it's going to the final editors, and then you're getting to see what the creative team is adding to it, and then you're seeing the plan that the social media team has put together that once your story is published, how many places it will go. It's really, really exciting. I can tell you as a published author, it's very exciting to see that happen. So just make sure you keep that in mind when you're putting in all the hard work. So I want to go over some of the next steps that will take place for you as you're working on your stories. First of all, you should be now doing your research using credible sources. And again, a list of those sources will be on the Curious Young Writers websites. They are in the handout in your packet. And if you have a question about whether one of your sources is credible, just check with one of your mentors and they'll be very happy to tell you. Then, after you have done your research, you need to write your theme. or your hook and 2 to 3 supporting points. In other words, there are now, human feces in pills that is helping people with a debilitating disease might be the main point. The backup point might be that this could make a difference for 14,000, for thousands of people that die each year. And then another backup point may be that this will be available within the next 2 years for everybody who suffers from this disease. So that would be, the hook, and then the two most important points that you decide people need to know about your story. This is not your lead paragraph, and it shouldn't be in formal sentences. It's just a list of your key focus and your backup points. And once you have them, you are going to contact your science star in whatever way they told you. I know some of them said that they preferred text. Some of them said they preferred email. Whichever way your science star wanted to be contacted, you are going to send them your name, remind them you're on their CYW team, and you're going to send them your list of your hook and your supporting points and say, I'm sending this to you for your approval. And you're not going to do anything else until you hear back from them with them saying, yes, that's great. Or maybe they have a little advice about how to change it. Once you get their approval, you can begin writing your draft. If you want any advice from your communications mentor while you're writing, maybe you're having trouble putting together a good lead, maybe you just don't even know how to put all the research together and just want a conversation about it, that's what your communications mentor is for. Or you can turn to other members of your team if that's helpful, but you have a lot of support available in that. You should write and make sure that your drafts will be into your team editor in Google Docs by August 21st. So those are your next steps as writers on the CYW team. We also have some other webinars planned for you and training sessions. The webinar for social media coordinators is Sunday, August 2nd. The webinar for editors is Tuesday, August 4th. The webinar for the creative team is Sunday, August 16th. And then we have some really exciting things planned for our Sundays at 7, which Jane has had for the last couple of years. And really, they're more like extracurricular, really fun networking opportunities and ways to hear from people who are doing really special things in the world of science communication. So she can describe to you who she has signed on for October.
Okay. In October or early November, we're hoping to have the date for you very soon. We are going to have a phenomenal presentation from Dave Waters. It was an DVM PhD. Dr. Waters is the director of the Center for Exceptional Longevity Studies at the Gerald P. Murphy Cancer Foundation. What's so exciting about this work is that Dr. Waters has just completed the Old Gray Muzzle Tour for 2015. He embarked on a 68-day cross-country trek to study 14 of the oldest living Rottweiler dogs in the U.S. in their own homes. His research team is proud to be innovating research on healthier aging by committing themselves to the intensive study of these exceptional dogs. They believe that dogs with extreme longevity, equal to humans who reach 100 years, hold the keys to unlocking the mechanisms that connect cancer resistance and successful aging. And here he uses a metaphor which I think exemplifies everything that Mary was trying to show you. Just imagine, he says, the oldest dogs as our greatest teachers. So on a Sunday in October or November, he will be discussing his work, but also his great commitment to improving the ability of scientists to speak clearly and compellingly and to tell their stories in a way that engages the broadest public audience. And he is tremendously supportive of our program because we're starting so early in order to bring these skills to students like yourselves who could be our future translators of complex science. Dave, are you online?
It's probably muted.
Oh, yeah. Dave, are you here? Because if you want to just say a few words, you're certainly welcome to. I don't know if he got on. Okay, but so that's the kind of program that we will be bringing to you. We have some science writers and communications specialists who are planning their presentations, so we'll be able to give you fuller descriptions and dates within a few weeks.
Great. I can say that he's going to be a really fun speaker, and he loves his